Good afternoon. My name is Ben Larkin and I'm the Chairman of Albion Developments. It's my pleasure to welcome you to the annual general meeting of the company. It's now noon, the time appointed for the AGM. Firstly, I'd like to introduce my fellow directors, Lynn Golby, Lord O'Shaughnessy and Patrick Reeve. Also present with me today is Will Fraser-Allen, who is, of course, the managing partner of Albion Capital, the company's investment manager. And Will shortly give a presentation on the results of the company for the year ended the 31st of December 2022. The quorum for the AGM is 2 members entitled to vote in person or by proxy. This has been met. I therefore declare the AGM open. The notice of the meeting has been in your hands for the statutory period, so I will take the notice as read. Due to the continued success of holding AGMs by webcast and to maximise engagement with shareholders, the board have again arranged for the Lumi online platform to broadcast this year's AGM. Members will be able to participate fully in the AGM, including a question and answer session and real-time voting on the board's proposed resolutions. Before we move on to Will's presentation, the next part is purely procedural. The resolutions will all be voted on by way of a poll. When following how the company conducted the process last year, the votes received under the poll will be added to the proxy votes that have already been received and verified by the registrar, Computershare. If you have already completed and submitted a proxy vote prior to the AGM, you don't need to vote again on the poll unless you wish to change your vote. Once I open the poll, voting on the Lumi platform, the list of resolutions will automatically appear on your screen. Please select the option that corresponds with how you want to vote, and the option will change colour and a confirmation message will appear to indicate your vote has been cast and received. To vote on all resolutions displayed, select the Vote All option at the top of the screen. If you want to change your vote, you have the option to re-select your choice. Finally, just as a reminder, you can either vote in favour or against the resolutions. You may also withhold your vote. Should you have any questions on the voting procedure, please send them through the platform and we will respond. I now declare the poll open. So moving to the main business of the AGM. And following the manager's presentation, the directors and the managers are happy to answer as many questions from members about the presentation or the proposed AGM resolutions as time permits. I'd like to also thank members who have already submitted their questions and queries through to the chairman's email address. If you wish to ask questions, please select the messaging icon from within the navigation bar and type your question on the top of the screen. To submit your question, click on the arrow to the right of the text box. I will now hand over to Will Fraser-Allen for the presentation.
Ben, thank you very much indeed, and welcome to those shareholders who have dialed in for today's presentation, where I will be running through the results for the year to 31st of December 2022 for the Albion Development VCT PLC. So if we move on to the next slide, You'll see that we'll cover performance in the year. I'll be picking up sort of key investment portfolio highlights, particularly around exits and new investments. And then I'll just touch by way of reminder on some of the initiatives we've got, both in terms of investment strategy, but also ESG. I'll also be looking at the prospects for the fund and commenting on the Q1 results that we have just announced to the market via RNS. So if I move to the first slide, it was a more challenging year than the previous year, it would be fair to say. So we saw a small decline in shareholder return of 1.71%, which brings our total shareholder value to date to just over £2, £2.02 and 0.22. And a closing NAV of 88.65, and we continued to pay tax-free dividends targeting around 5% of NAV. So if we move on to the next slide, it was a year that continued, that began and then continued to be more difficult in terms of the macroeconomic and geopolitical world that we live in. The war in Ukraine in February, and then steadily raising interest rates throughout the year made it a particularly tricky environment for investing generally, but also for the technology space specifically. We're not out of it yet. The inflation is still running high, although with the most recent numbers suggest inflation is coming down, but very much still there. And there is still prospects of further interest rate rise. So what is worth remembering is that we have designed our portfolio to be an all-weather portfolio, and that's specifically around the types of businesses we back that provide mission-critical products and services to their mostly enterprise customers. So, i.e., this is products and services that these enterprises will need, whatever the environment they're in. And when I come on to discuss the first quarter's results just announced, you will see that in the first quarter we've got off to a strong start. Next slide, please. We look at performance over 1, 3, 5, 10 years. The 10-year return is still looking strong at an average of 8.2% per annum. So that is comfortably ahead of our dividend target of around 5% of NAV. And indeed, both on the 3 and 5 year, we're also well ahead of that 5% target. Moving to the next slide. Key highlights in the year, we had a strong fundraise this year. Now, 2022 actually shows 2 fundraisings in 1 year. It's just the timing of when they're launched. So effectively, you've got both the 2021-22 and 22-23 at a total of 26 million. That means that the VCT has got a decent level of cash, both to support its existing portfolio, but importantly to make new investments as and when they arise. In terms of exits, decent exits. So My Meds and Me, Phrasey, and Credit Kudos, and all sold in the year, and I'll talk to those in a bit more detail later on in this presentation. But importantly, a very strong investment rate. So we invested in 15 new companies during the course of 2022, which is a record for Albion, and reflects both the increased investment capability, i.e. a strong, a well-resourced investment team, but also the opportunity that we saw last year to step in a number of situations where companies were looking to raise money and there was less funding available in the market. So very, very much what VCTs are designed to do is to provide funding to small, growing, innovative companies in the UK. Share buybacks, a little bit up on last year, which you would expect given the increased size of the company, but still at a relative low level. And dividends, again, targeting that 5% higher because the company itself is larger. Moving to the next slide. Thank you. So what were the key drivers of the results in the years? We talked about the exit of MyMeds, and I'll go into that in a bit more detail. Converter, which is all about sales lead generation, it's traded strongly. But against that, we did have two write-downs of note. One is Black Swan, and the other is Aviva. Both of those were on the back of slower growth rates than we had previously expected. And when you are valuing companies, very much linking that valuation to growth, the corresponding effect of slower growth is reduced valuations. And then if we look more generally, and the detail is in the annual report and accounts, we had both write-ups to the tune of 4.1 million, which were offset by write-downs to the tune of 4.6 million. And on the slides, I named some of the key companies that contributed to those movements. Turning to the next slide, please. So the portfolio, 62 companies now, employing over 4,700 people. Those are predominantly UK jobs. It's a decently diversified portfolio, although I will talk about the top three, which are now becoming quite a substantial part of that portfolio. But if we look in terms of where the portfolio is focused, as we've discussed in my previous presentations to you as shareholders, we're increasingly seeing a focus on healthcare, which includes digital healthcare at 21%, fintech 18%, and then other software and technologies at 24%. So very much moving in the direction of travel that we've set out of healthcare, software, and software in particular. Outside that, we still have our holding in renewable energy, now at 8%, which is reducing each year as the fund increases in size, and as those assets generate cash, which is in turn transferred to the fund. And really, that's broadly the portfolio, but with a decent weighting to cash of 25% currently, which is, as I've alluded to earlier, sets the company up to both support its portfolio and to make new investments. If we turn to the next slide. Again, just this slide you'll be familiar with. It's just giving you a sense of how we look at the portfolio, and that's really in two areas. One, stage of investments, so larger companies being less volatile than very young ones. So as particularly the three largest have increased in value, you're now seeing some 75% of the portfolio, this is the invested portfolio, is now invested in what we describe as scale-up companies, i.e. those with revenues of over 5 million. And the very early stage, less than 1 million of revenue, sitting at about 10%. And it's worth reminding ourselves that that's a very important driver of future value. So that's the acorns from which mighty oaks will grow. And the same picture is sort of replicated when you look at the portfolio in terms of employee numbers, and another proxy for size. That we've now got over 50% of the invested portfolio in companies, this is by value, in companies with more than 100 employees, and less than 20, i.e. very, very small, is right down there at 4%. If we move to the next slide, please. And this is an important slide, and just by way of reminder, what we are trying to do here is to back really successful companies that deliver outlying performance. So it's really important to delivering venture capital returns is that you back your winners and maximize the value creation of the larger, more successful companies in your portfolio. So the three largest now account for some 27.6% of the NAV, and that was in December, and that has subsequently grown since. So in terms of those three, we've got Quantexa, which is our data analytics into financial services, so the detection of financial crime, but is now broadening its customer base outside into government and elsewhere. And as you can see here, the value has increased dramatically on the back of significant revenue growth. Egress, similarly, we've seen substantial growth there through its platform which encrypts email and allows secure data exchange, particularly used, for example, by local authorities, the NHS, Ministry of Justice, by way of example, growing nicely, starting to get a decent presence in the US, which is the holy grail for UK software businesses. And then finally, Pravica, which is our children's medicines business that has got an existing Eleanor drug in the market, and we're now very much encouraged by the progress of the pipeline of drugs that is developed, and hope to have some good news in terms of further product launches in the coming months. Next slide, please. Lots of new investment activities, the 15 that I referred to, just a few examples. PEPI fits in our sort of digital health elements of the portfolio, so that's providing support to employees in areas such as menopause and other health requirements, and this is effectively provided as a benefit by the employees, now rapidly signing up new customers. Tokyo is very much in fintech. They're a provider of fintech solutions to companies that want to provide financial services. Peak Data is providing analytics and particular insight to large pharma, and that's to support their sales and marketing activities. And then finally, CS Genetics, all in the area of cell sequencing. Next slide, please. PEPI was an £8 million investment from us, of which 1.4 million came from AADV, and that is around a strategy to expand into the US. And then if I move to the next slide, Tokyo is the financial services business, which is allowing companies to build software financial services products with a level of ease that just wouldn't have been possible but a few years ago. And again, this was a 7.4 million investment from the Albion VCTs, of which 1.4 million was from AADV. So lots of product development going on, and then expansion from there. Moving to the next slide. A very important part of what we do is to continue to support our portfolio companies as they grow over time, as we become more confident that their business model is working. So a number of these companies will be familiar to you from earlier presentations. Helios in the area of supporting the mental health of adolescents in particular. It allows clinicians to treat young people in a family-centric way. Black Swan in data analytics to support consumer products. Runa is a digital rewards program, platform provider, and then Transfic is connectivity mostly for larger financial institutions such as banks in terms of trading products such as fixed income. Next slide, please. Exits are an important part of what we do. It's what delivers both shareholder value, but it also generates important cash to enable us to support our dividend paying strategy. So we were pleased to see some strong exits in the first quarter of last year. MyMeds, we've been invested for some years, and it was nice to see this business being acquired by Stanley Capital through one of their portfolio companies. Stanley Capital, a private equity house, and they were looking to build on this platform, which effectively supports clinical trials, particularly safety data. And then in terms of what the returns, we invested 3.3 million, and then we returned 3.3 times. So a nice exit to have. Next slide, please. Credit Kudos was a new modern style credit scoring platform. This was acquired by Apple. Really nice to see a very large global technology player like Apple seeing value in a business that we've backed, and we were only in business for a couple of years or so, but we saw a very healthy 5.4 times return, delivering proceeds of 1.8 million to Albion Development VCT. So a really nice exit, nice return, and real evidence that strategic buyers see the value of some of the companies within our portfolio. Next slide, please. Just by way of reminder, what is our investment strategy? It's very much to invest from very early on. So this is what we would call seed, so early stage businesses, putting in a relatively small amount initially, and then as we become more confident in those businesses, we further invest. But we also do invest Series A, which is typically a larger investment into a more established business. And on occasion, and Pepe would be a good example of this, we will invest where the opportunity arises in Series B, where companies have achieved what's known as product market fit. And there's a product that they know how to sell, and we're backing the growth of that sales and marketing activity. And it's all about backing long-term trends, software around the digitalization of the world around us. Healthcare similarly is seeing huge growth in how healthcare is delivered through digital. And that's all typically it's B2B, so selling to enterprises, selling to businesses, as opposed to backing consumer-facing businesses, which we see as more affected by economic cycles. Next slide, please. ESG. I know many of our shareholders, and indeed we at Albion, are committed to ESG. It's an important lens through which we look at the way we invest. So it's making sure that the companies we back are long-term, they're sustainable, and they contribute to the world around them. And we believe in so doing that, we will deliver long-term enhanced value to our investors. So that means that we apply those ESG principles in all stages of investing. So whether that's when we appraise companies, whether that's when we are working with companies when they are part of our portfolio, helping them to develop their ESG strategy, but also making sure that what we ultimately sell to an acquirer is a business that would fit into the ESG principles and strategies of the large corporate acquirers whom we rely on to deliver exits to this fund. And then beyond that is increasingly measuring the sustainability and societal impact of our investments, collecting that data, and over time being able to increasingly demonstrate the impact of ESG on our investment performance. Next slide, please. So what are we doing at Albion? We've talked about how we approach ESG within the fund, but we're very focused on our own impact at Albion. That's in terms of looking at achieving a net zero by 2030. We are purchasing carbon removal permits, so that's through investment in biochar, so absorption of carbon, and then we're measuring our carbon footprint and looking to reduce that over time. Within the business itself, we are working with FairHQ, which is a software platform that helps us measure our own D&I, diversity and inclusion, within the business, and we're looking to increasingly improve over time. And an example of where we're working more broadly is that we are providing mentoring as a way of bringing underrepresented groups into venture capital. So looking to broaden those that are able to do what we do and very much enjoy. And then within our sort of charitable endeavours, we're delighted to be supporting WizKids, which provide wheelchairs and other important equipment to disabled children. And then more broadly, we've discussed ESG within our investment cycle, and we are very much looking at how we score within the UN PRI framework, and making sure that we regularly update you as shareholders, but also the VCT boards on our ESG progress. Next slide, please. So where do we think the world is going? How is the portfolio going to react in this what is still some fairly challenging times? I do take considerable comfort from the portfolio. I discussed how it's spread across sector, how it's spread across how it's spread across our target sector areas, how it's spread across stages of maturity, and importantly, the focus that we have on mission critical products, which is designed to provide resilience. Discussing consumer facing sectors, we avoid to take away that sort of undue risk of economic down cycles. And very importantly, we do have cash that allows us to capitalise both on opportunities in the portfolio and new investments when they arise. But I'll go on to Q1 because that'll give you a sense of how the year has begun. And on the next slide, please. You'll see that we've actually had a very strong quarter. So NAV has increased by 7.1% in that first quarter, which is a significant jump up. And that, as those of you who have been following our RNS announcements, has been largely driven by Quantexa, the largest investment on our portfolio, which has increased in value by some 10 million on the back of a very substantial fundraising that it completed in early April. And that was a Series E, so that's and it raised some $129 million. So this is a fundraising that in the current market, which has led to a substantial NAV uplift. We will be continuing with virtual AGMs as you're currently experiencing. But what I would like to just mention to everybody is our physical annual shareholder seminar, which will be held in November. So that is a great opportunity to get all our shareholders, many of our shareholders together, to where we can talk about all the Albion VCTs. We get portfolio companies to present and other interesting speakers. It's a great chance to meet a number of VCT directors who attend, and indeed the Albion team will be out in force. So November seminar, well worth attending. We've announced a dividend, the first dividend of the year, which is 2.22p, payable on the 31st of May. That's towards it. Effectively calculates as 2.5% of NAV towards our 5% target of NAV for the year. But importantly, it is worth highlighting that as Quantexa has increased substantially in value, that does have the effect of increasing the concentration of the top 3 investments in the portfolio, which now accounts for 30 to 32.5% of NAV as at the 31st of March. So on that note, I will hand back to Ben, who is going to run the Q&A session.
Thanks, Will. So can I now invite questions from shareholders, which should appear on my screen? Okay, so unsurprisingly, one of the first questions is, why is this a virtual AGM as opposed to an actual in-person AGM? I think probably I'll take that question. It's because this is what the majority of our shareholders have indicated that they would prefer, and that allows them to maximize their engagement with us. This way we do seem to be able to reach out to far more of the shareholders than we were able to do when we had physical meetings. And in fact, people, if it's inconvenient for them now, people do actually view this later on the kind of YouTube platform. So it seems to be a bit more convenient for everybody. Interestingly, one of the other Albion funds, the Tech and Gen fund, tried to do a hybrid back in 2022, where they had a physical meeting and a virtual meeting, and only 5 shareholders turned up for the physical meeting, and they're doing the same as us this year, which is the virtual meeting. So it does seem to be the way forward that people prefer, and particularly as our shareholders get more and more comfortable dealing with things on an online basis and get more and more comfortable with the technology involved. It does seem to be the way forward. It's also obviously much more kind of efficient in terms of cost and in terms of expense for the fund, and therefore for the shareholders. There is always a place for in-person meetings, and you'll have seen Will's plug for the shareholder seminar on the 15th of November. And we'd really encourage shareholders to come to that. That is a great opportunity to interact and find out a lot more about the portfolio companies that your money is invested in, and to kind of quiz people and generally get that interaction which otherwise could have been achieved at the AGM. So please do sign up if you can for the shareholder seminar on the 15th of November. It would be great to see as many of you as possible there, and it's well worth your time to come along to that. At the moment, there are no other questions coming up on my screen. So I think that I will then call the Q&A over and move now to the formal business of the AGM. So the full text of each of the resolutions were set out in the notice of the meeting, and the board is recommending that members vote in favour of all the resolutions. So I'll briefly summarise those resolutions. The first resolution is to receive and adopt the company's accounts for the year ended 31st of December 2022, together with the strategic report and the reports of the director and auditor. The second resolution is to approve the director's remuneration policy. The third resolution is to approve the director's remuneration report for the year ended 31st of December 2022. The fourth resolution is for my own re-election as a director of the company. The fifth resolution is the re-election of Lynn Golby as a director of the company. The sixth resolution is the re-election of Lord O'Shaughnessy as a director of the company. And the seventh resolution is the re-election of Patrick Reeve as a director of the company. The eighth resolution is the reappointment of BDO LLP as auditor of the company to hold office from the conclusion of the meeting to the conclusion of the next meeting at which the accounts are to be laid. The ninth resolution is to authorise the directors to agree the auditor's remuneration. The 10th resolution is to allow the directors to allot shares. The penultimate resolution is a special resolution to give the directors the power to disapply preemption rights. And the final resolution, which once again is a special resolution, is to authorise the company to make one or more market purchases of ordinary shares in the capital of the company. The results of the voting, including the proxy votes on each of the resolutions, will be announced after the AGM through a regulatory information service announcement. Additionally, the results will be published on Albion Capital's website as soon as reasonably practical. I confirm that the voting has now concluded, and I now declare the poll closed. In the meantime, I will show on the screen the current proxy votes that have been received by the registrar. As you will note, the proxy votes are comfortably in favour of all of the proposed resolutions. Thank you very much indeed. That concludes the formal business of the AGM. The board does really welcome any feedback you may have. Please do engage by sending an email to aadvchair@Albion Capital. I now formally close the AGM. Thank you all very much for joining this AGM. And on behalf of the whole board, I hope you all stay safe and well.